panelists, we bring in General Keith Kellogg, former National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, America First Policy Institute Center for American Security co-chair, and we welcome Richard Goldberg, Senior Advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and formerly White House National Security Council Director. General Keith, my friend, it just, why? You tell me, okay? This guy Kirby, but Kirby's not alone. I just happened to single him out because he went on this stupid goofball show. But the fact remains, from day one, all this hand-wringing, we are always worried that Iran will escalate. Well, guess what? They've already escalated. They've been escalating for a couple of years under this policy of appeasement, which has given them $80 billion or more in foreign exchange and energy reserves. Keith, this is no way to run a railroad. This is no way to run a national defense or national security policy.
Yeah, Larry, thanks for having me. Look, they're living in an alternative universe, one that I was never part of, and neither were you. Thank the Lord for that. Look, I would remind everybody listening, there are 33 dead Americans from the attack by Hamas into Israel. 33. 12 plus or minus are missing right now. And you've got to show strength. The fact of the matter is, not showing strength, not being very decisive, just feeds onto the problem that's being created. You know, what you've got to be able to do is actually, and I use the term super escalate. You know, I remember when President Trump, we were having problems with Iran after we'd killed Soleimani. He reminded the Supreme Leader, Khomeini, he said, just to make sure you understand, if you come back now after we've killed Soleimani and do something dumb, there are 52 targets we have on the list right now. And I remember seeing the target list. There's a few more than that, but 52 targets. And oh, by the way, the number one thing on that target is you.
Yep.
And we're going to come after you.
Yep.
And he got the message really quick.
Yep.
You've got to do that. If you're going to break this cycle of violence, you've got to go right to the heart of the terrorism issue. The person, the organization, the nation that's got their hand on the terrorism tiller is Iran, and we must address it. They are the ones who are controlling Hamas and Hezbollah, and we need to address Iran as well as the other two.
Richard Goldberg, I mean, I think Tom Cotton is right. You know, lobbing a couple of bombs at unmanned munitions depots or whatever it was in Syria means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. That doesn't hurt Tehran. They may be laughing at us. And, Richard, I don't understand. Biden has the authority. I mean, he won't do it, but he has the authority for sanctions. He could stop a ship on the high seas, a ship carrying oil to China, for example, a ship that might be carrying drones or other military supplies to Russia, for example. I mean, Richard, what good does lobbing a bomb at Syria? It's like the lowest common denominator. Nobody cares.
Larry, there's a contradiction on the table, and if you're sitting in Tehran, you see it, you feel it, you sense it. You know, you can lob a couple of missiles at these unmanned munitions depots in Syria, the lowest escalation response that they chose. But at the same time, you can't say you've deterred Iran when Iran knows they're still deterring you. Because if you're not enforcing the sanctions, if you're letting $10 billion get opened up in Iraq, $6 billion moved into Qatar, you're letting the oil flow by 1 million barrels per day extra over the summer under a nuclear deal, why is he allowing all this sanctions relief? He's afraid of having to confront Iran over its nuclear program. He's afraid that if they escalate 90% enriched uranium, he may have to use the U.S. military. He doesn't want to do that, so he's trying to pay a racket. What do the Iranians see? They see somebody who's afraid. So on the one hand, he won't shut down the sanctions relief. He won't snap back the UN Security Council resolution to bring back UN sanctions. But he says we're deterring them with a couple of missile strikes. Which Joe Biden should Tehran believe?
You know, Keith, all right, look, I don't want to second-guess our military because these kinds of bombing decisions and so forth are made by the civilians. They're made by the commander-in-chief, who is the president, okay? But I would like to stop Iran's oil production. That's where the money's coming from, the bulk of it. All right, I know they're getting money from the IMF and some other places, and we could address that because that's stupid also. But really, why not take out an oil field, Keith? Why not, Keith Kellogg? Take out an oil field. It's been done before. It could be done again. We have precision bombing. We have all these, you know, aircraft carrier convoys around? Why not really hurt Iran? Because Iran is the center of the problem.
Yeah, that's what we should do, Larry. In fact, that was on the target list a few years ago. The refineries were on the target list. The drone manufacturing facilities were on the target list. The people were on the target list, meaning Khomeini, and then the replacement for Soleimani, who was Ismail Ghani. We put all that on the target list, and they should do that. But they're being very, very hesitant. They're not doing what I call super escalation, and they need to do it. It's how you have to get their attention and break that cycle. And you made a comment about stopping a ship. It's very clear to me what you do is you tell all those foreign flag carriers, you better reflag your ships, get them out of there, because they're going to be a target as well. And once you do that, once you make those hard moves, then they gain respect for you. You know, I remember what happened after Soleimani, after 8 days. Most of the world forgot. But 8 days after that we killed Soleimani, the Iranians shot down a Ukrainian airliner leaving Tehran International Airport. Why? Because through the intercepts, we realized they thought we were coming after Khomeini. They got it. They understood they needed to respect us and they needed to fear us. And until they do that, you're going to keep seeing attacks on Americans. And one of these days, an American is going to get killed, and then what? And that is what's going to happen to this administration in the near future, I believe.
Richard, in your judgment, what's the next step? Where should the United... Now, putting the Israel invasion aside, okay, we're going to talk about that elsewhere in the show, and, you know, God bless the IDF, and they'll get the job done. What should the United States do?
First thing is to communicate that you are willing to use force and basically pass along messages the way the general has just indicated, and make sure you have a force posture to show the capability to follow through on that threat. And that gives you the space to then shut off all the resources to the regime, turn off all the cash valves, lock down the $10 billion that you were moving out of Iraq, lock down the $6 billion, and then, Larry, as you're saying, start shutting off the flow of oil to China. Tell the Chinese the deal is off. We're not letting you import all this oil, and then start seizing ships. We can do that. Remember, over the summer, when Iran started seizing ships in response to some sanctions enforcement, the president did send in the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Navy opened fire a couple times, and the Iranians ran away. They do not want a direct confrontation with the United States, but they need to see a president who has the political will to use force, not just the rhetoric claiming that he
Why
will.
is it, Richard, why is it, okay, I'm kind of going crazy. Why is it that our spokesman, Kirby, but Kirby's just echoing, I know how this works. He comes out of the Oval Office, the president's telling him what to say, the chief of staff. Why is it our people are always saying that they fear escalation from Iran? Why don't we want Iran to fear escalation from the United States? You know, we're not only bigger, wealthier, we're more powerful. And our military can eat them alive. Eat them alive. We have an Air Force. Iran doesn't have a serious Air Force. We have unbelievable missiles. Iran doesn't have serious missiles. They got a lot of people running around, Hamas and Israel, and that's a dreadful story, and they're a bunch of barbarians, I get that. But we could eat them alive. Why don't we ever communicate that?
The answer that everyone needs to know, and it's the honest answer, is that since October 7th, for 3 weeks, the Biden administration has been hoping and praying they can have two separate policies that contradict themselves: a Hamas policy and an Iran nuclear deal policy. And they can't coexist.
Right.
And they're now coming to terms with that, and they're going to have to cut off the nuclear deal.
And the whole Mideast policy that you briefly described, and Keith, has collapsed. Collapsed. And the collapse of that policy is there on the battlefield in Gaza, and Lord knows where else. It has utterly collapsed. And it's time for Biden to either step down as president or at least go before the American people and say, I'm going to start something different. Jimmy Carter actually did that 40 years ago. O'Brien and others have talked about it. I got to get out. Producers are yelling at me. This drives me crazy. Weakness leads to weakness. Keith, weakness leads to weakness. Strength leads to strength. People were scared of Ronald Reagan. Reagan's finger was on the button. Well, good. Reagan, you know, had that radio show, Keith. One morning he said, testing, testing. In 15 seconds, we'll bomb Moscow. Ha, ha, ha. That was just a joke. Remember that? I was there when all that was going on. Anyway, I got to get out. General Keith Kellogg, Richard Goldberg, you're both terrific. Thanks, gentlemen.